What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected voices gets pushed too far on live television? In just 38 seconds, Michael Strahan managed to turn a simple morning interview into one of the most shocking moments in Good Morning America history. This is the story of how a legendary actor reached his breaking point and walked off set, leaving millions of viewers stunned and a host scrambling to explain what just happened. Morgan Freeman arrived at the Good Morning America studio that morning expecting a typical promotional interview, the kind he had done hundreds of times before. He was there to talk about his latest film, a passion project he had spent years bringing to life. He walked onto that bright studio set with his trademark calm demeanor, greeting the panel with handshakes and that warm smile audiences have loved for decades. The cameras were rolling. The studio audience was excited. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Michael Strahan sat across from him, flanked by his co-hosts Robin Roberts and George Stephanopoulos. The energy in the studio felt routine at first, just another celebrity interview on a weekday morning. Robin started things off with a softball question about the new movie, and Morgan answered with his usual eloquence, describing the character he played and what drew him to the role. His voice filled the studio with that distinctive tone that has narrated countless films and documentaries. Everything was going smoothly. Then Michael Strahan took over the questioning, and that's when the tone began to shift. "So, Morgan," Michael said, leaning back in his chair with a casual confidence, "you've been doing this for what, like a million years now?" He laughed at his own joke. The studio audience offered a few uncomfortable chuckles. Morgan smiled politely, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "I've been fortunate to have a long career, yes," he replied simply. But Michael wasn't done. "No, seriously though," he continued. "At your age, why are you still doing action scenes? Shouldn't you be, I don't know, taking it easy, playing grandfathers and wise mentors?" Robin Roberts shifted uncomfortably in her seat. You could see it on her face, that look that said she knew something was off about this line of questioning. George glanced down at his notes, his expression tight. Morgan Freeman's posture changed, just slightly. His shoulders squared a bit, his jaw tightened, but his voice remained measured. "I do the roles that interest me," he said. "Age doesn't dictate what stories I can tell or what characters I can embody. That's never been how I approach my work." Michael laughed again, but this time it had an edge to it. "Come on, man. You're telling me you're not tired? You're not ready to just sit back and collect those easy voiceover checks? I mean, that's the dream, right? Just show up, read some lines about penguins or space, go home." The studio went quiet. That uncomfortable kind of quiet where everyone knows something wrong just happened, but nobody knows quite how to address it yet. Robin jumped in quickly, trying to redirect. "Morgan, tell us about working with the director on this film. I heard you two have a special collaborative relationship." Morgan turned to her gratefully. "Yes, we do. She's a brilliant filmmaker who—" But Michael cut him off, actually interrupted him mid-sentence. Hold on," Michael said, waving his hand dismissively. "I want to go back to something. Morgan, real talk. How much of your career at this point is just coasting on your voice? Because, let's be honest, you could read a menu and people would pay to hear it." George Stephanopoulos finally spoke up. "Michael, maybe we should." But Michael wasn't listening. He was locked in now, seemingly unaware of or unconcerned with the discomfort spreading across the set. "I'm just asking what everyone's thinking," Michael said. "Like, what's the last role you did that actually challenged you? That wasn't just Morgan Freeman playing Morgan Freeman. You could see it happening, right there on live television. Morgan Freeman's legendary patience beginning to crack. His hands, which had been resting calmly on the armrests of his chair, gripped the fabric just a little tighter. His eyes, usually warm and inviting, had gone cold. "I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish with these questions," Morgan said, his voice dropping lower, taking on that edge that makes his villain roles so compelling. "But I came here to discuss my work, not to be condescended to about my age, or have my artistic choices diminished." Michael Strahan seemed almost energized by the pushback, like he thought this was good television. "Hey, I'm just having a conversation," he said, throwing his hands up. "This is what we do here, real talk, honest questions. I thought you could handle it." That last part, "I thought you could handle it." That's when you could see Morgan Freeman make a decision. Something shifted in his expression. A resignation, a disappointment, the look of someone who had just lost all patience with the situation he found himself in. Robin Roberts tried again. "Morgan, please, we'd love to hear more about." But Morgan held up a hand, silencing her gently. No, he said quietly. "Let's address this directly. He turned back to Michael. You invited me here under the pretense of promoting my film. Instead, you've spent the last several minutes questioning my relevance, mocking my career choices, and generally displaying a level of disrespect I didn't anticipate from a professional morning show. Michael started to respond, but Morgan kept going. I've been in this industry for over 50 years. I've worked with the greatest directors, actors, and filmmakers of multiple generations. I've been fortunate enough to tell stories that matter to me and to audiences around the world. And I don't need to justify any of that to you or to anyone else. The studio was dead silent now. Even the crew behind the cameras had stopped moving. This was no longer a playful interview gone slightly off track. This was something else entirely, something real and raw happening in real time. George Stephanopoulos looked like he wanted to crawl under the desk. Robin Roberts had her hand over her mouth, eyes wide, and Michael Strahan, for the first time, seemed to realize he might have pushed too far. Look, man, I didn't mean, Michael started, but his voice had lost that cocky edge. Now he just sounded defensive. Morgan shook his head slowly. You absolutely meant it, he said. Every question was designed to diminish, to make me feel less than, and I'm unclear on why you felt that was appropriate. Michael tried to laugh it off. That nervous laugh people do when they know they've messed up but don't want to admit it. Come on, Morgan, you're being too sensitive. This is just how we do things here. It's entertainment. It's banter. And that word, sensitive, that was the final straw. Morgan Freeman stood up, just stood right up in the middle of the live broadcast. The microphone pack clipped to his belt, pulled the wire taut, and a sound technician rushed forward to disconnect it. But Morgan was already removing it himself, his movements deliberate and calm despite the tension crackling through the studio. Entertainment, Morgan repeated, his voice carrying across the silent set. You think disrespecting your guests is entertainment. You think belittling someone's life work makes for good television. He placed the microphone on his chair and looked directly at Michael Strahan, not with anger, with something worse, disappointment. I've been interviewed thousands of times by everyone from high school journalists to the most respected names in media, and I can honestly say this has been one of the most unprofessional experiences I've ever had. Robin Roberts stood up, her hand reaching out. Morgan, please, we can reset. We can start over. Her voice was pleading, genuine. You could tell she was mortified by what had transpired, but Morgan just gave her a sad smile. Robin, you're a class act. You always have been. But I'm not going to sit here and be disrespected on live television while everyone pretends it's acceptable because it makes for dramatic content. George Stephanopoulos finally found his voice. Mr. Freeman, on behalf of Good Morning America, I apologize. This should never have. But Morgan was already walking away. Actually walking off the set while the cameras were still rolling. His footsteps echoed in the stunned silence. You could hear every step as he crossed the studio floor. Crew members parted to let him through, their faces shocked. Some looked angry. Some looked embarrassed. One camera operator kept filming, capturing every moment of this unbelievable scene. Michael Strahan sat frozen in his chair, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror as he realized what had just happened, what he had just caused to happen, on live television, in front of millions of viewers. Robin Roberts sank back into her seat, her head in her hands. George looked directly at the camera, trying to salvage something from this disaster. We're going to take a quick break, he said, his voice strained. We'll be right back. But the damage was done. Morgan Freeman, one of the most respected actors in Hollywood, had just walked off Good Morning America, and it was entirely because of how Michael Strahan had treated him. The behind-the-scenes chaos that erupted the moment they cut to commercial was immediate and intense. Producers rushed onto the set, assistants scrambled with phones pressed to their ears, and Michael Strahan sat there, still seemingly unable to process what his behavior had just cost the show. Robin Roberts turned to him, and her voice, usually so warm and friendly, was ice cold. What were you thinking? She asked, not yelling. Somehow that made it worse. What on earth were you thinking? Michael started to defend himself. I was just trying to make it interesting, to push a little, get past the usual promotional talking points. But even as he said it, you could tell he knew how weak it sounded. George Stephanopoulos removed his earpiece and set it down hard on the desk. You weren't pushing, you were attacking. There's a difference, Michael, a huge difference. He stood up and walked off the set without another word, leaving Michael and Robin alone at the desk. The studio audience, which had been held during the commercial break, was buzzing with shocked conversation. Some people were recording on their phones. This was going to be everywhere within minutes. Robin looked at Michael with an expression of deep frustration. "Do you understand what you've done?" she asked. "That's Morgan Freeman. He's a legend. He's beloved. And you just humiliated him on live television because you wanted to create a moment." Michael's face had gone pale. The reality was finally sinking in. "I didn't think he'd actually walk off," he said quietly. "I thought we were just having a back and forth." Robin shook her head. "It wasn't a back and forth. It was you repeatedly disrespecting him while he tried to maintain his dignity. And when he finally stood up for himself, you called him sensitive. Do you not see the problem with that?" A producer approached the desk, tablet in hand. "We're back in 30 seconds, she said curtly. "Michael, you're going to apologize on air. You're going to own this completely. No excuses, no trying to spin it, just apologize." Michael nodded numbly. The floor director began counting down. 10 seconds. 9, 8. The studio lights came back up to full brightness. The camera focused on Michael Strahan sitting alone at the desk. Robin had moved off camera, a deliberate choice. She wasn't going to be part of whatever came next. Michael looked directly into the camera, and for once, all that charisma and confidence was gone. He looked small, shaken. "We're back," he said, his voice unsteady. "And I need to address what just happened before the break. I owe Morgan Freeman an enormous apology. My line of questioning was inappropriate, disrespectful, and completely out of line. I allowed my desire to create what I thought would be compelling television to override basic respect and professionalism." He paused, swallowing hard. "Mr. Freeman came here to discuss his work, and instead of honoring that, I repeatedly diminished his accomplishments and questioned his choices in a way that was condescending and wrong. His decision to leave was completely justified, and I take full responsibility for creating a situation that made him feel he had no other option." The camera stayed on him, unblinking, unforgiving. "I've reached out to his representatives to apologize directly," Michael continued. "But I also wanted to apologize to our viewers who had to witness that, and to my colleagues here at Good Morning America, who should never have been put in that position. I'm sorry." The segment ended. They went to commercial again, and Michael Strahan sat at that desk alone, the weight of what he had done settling over him like a blanket. Backstage, crew members were already talking about what had happened. Some were angry at Michael, others felt bad for him, but everyone agreed on one thing: they had just witnessed something unprecedented. A guest of Morgan Freeman's stature doesn't just walk off a major morning show. It takes something significant to push someone that far. And Michael Strahan had found exactly what that something was: disrespect, condescension, the casual dismissal of a lifetime of work. Those were the things that had driven a legend off the set. In his dressing room, Morgan Freeman was gathering his belongings. His publicist was on the phone, fielding calls from every media outlet in the country. Everyone wanted a statement. Everyone wanted to know what had happened from his perspective. But Morgan was quiet, calm. He had said everything he needed to say on that set. He had drawn his line and stood by it. And now he was simply leaving, the way he had every right to do. A young production assistant knocked on the door hesitantly. "Mr. Freeman?" she said quietly. "I just wanted to say, I'm so sorry about what happened out there. You didn't deserve that." Morgan looked at her and smiled, that genuine smile. "Thank you," he said. "I appreciate that. And I hope you remember this moment. Remember that no matter where you are in your career, you have the right to be treated with dignity. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." The assistant nodded, tears in her eyes. "I won't," she said. Morgan picked up his coat and walked out of the dressing room, down the hallway, past the studio where the show was still scrambling to recover, past the green room where other guests waited nervously, unsure if their segments would even happen now, and out the door into the bright morning light. He got into the car that was waiting for him and left. Simple as that. He just left. Back in the studio, the show continued, but it was different now. The energy was off. The remaining segments felt hollow and forced. Robin Roberts conducted her interviews with her usual professionalism, but you could see the strain on her face. George Stephanopoulos did his news updates, but his delivery was clipped and tense. And Michael Strahan tried to carry on, but every smile felt fake. Every laugh felt forced. He was going through the motions, but everyone watching could tell his mind was elsewhere, replaying what had happened, understanding, maybe for the first time, the real impact of his words. Social media exploded. Within an hour, clips of Morgan Freeman walking off the show were trending worldwide. People were dissecting every word of the exchange, analyzing Michael's questions and Morgan's responses. The overwhelming consensus was clear. Morgan Freeman had been completely justified in leaving, and Michael Strahan had crossed a line that never should have been crossed. Think pieces started appearing, articles about ageism in Hollywood, discussions about respect and professionalism in media, debates about what makes for good television versus what makes for exploitative content. But through it all, one image remained: Morgan Freeman standing up, removing his microphone, and walking away with his dignity intact. That was the moment everyone remembered, not the questions that provoked it, not the apology that followed, just that moment of a man deciding he deserved better and acting on it. That was the power of it, the simplicity. He didn't yell, he didn't make a scene in the traditional sense, he just calmly explained why the situation was unacceptable and removed himself from it. And in doing so, he made a statement far more powerful than any heated argument could have achieved. The studio crew finished the show that morning, but everyone knew things had changed. You don't recover from a moment like that easily. The trust had been broken, not just with Morgan Freeman, but with every future guest who would now wonder if they might face similar treatment. Every publicist who would now think twice before booking their clients. Every viewer who would now question whether the show prioritized respect or ratings. And Michael Strahan, despite his on-air apology, would carry this moment with him. It would become part of his story, the time he pushed too far and learned a very public, very painful lesson about the consequences of disrespect. In the weeks that followed, the industry talked about nothing else. Other shows used it as a teaching moment for their hosts. Journalism schools incorporated it into their ethics discussions. And Morgan Freeman himself, when finally asked about it in a later interview with a different outlet, simply said, "I believe in treating people with respect, all people, in all situations. And when that courtesy isn't extended to me, I don't feel obligated to remain in that environment. It's that simple." That's what resonated. The simplicity of it, the clarity. There was no gray area, no room for interpretation. Michael Strahan had been disrespectful. Morgan Freeman had responded with dignity. And the whole world had watched it happen in real time. Some people tried to defend Michael, saying he was just trying to be provocative, to create interesting television, but those defenses rang hollow. Because there's a difference between asking challenging questions and being disrespectful, between pushing for honesty and pushing someone's boundaries of tolerance. And Michael had crossed from one into the other without seeming to notice or care until it was too late. The Good Morning America set felt different after that day. Hosts were more careful with their questions. Producers were more vigilant about tone. Everyone was more aware that there were lines that shouldn't be crossed, no matter how much they might want that viral moment or that shocking exchange, because they had learned what happens when you forget that basic truth. You lose the trust of your guests. You lose the respect of your audience. And sometimes you lose both in the span of 38 seconds on live television. Robin Roberts addressed it in a later interview, speaking carefully but honestly. "It was a difficult moment for all of us," she said, "but it was an important reminder that our job is to serve our audience and honor our guests. When we lose sight of that, when we prioritize spectacle over substance, we fail at both." She didn't mention Michael by name. She didn't need to. Everyone knew what she was talking about. Everyone remembered. And George Stephanopoulos, in his own subtle way, made changes to how interviews were conducted. More preparation, more thought given to question phrasing, more awareness of power dynamics and respect. These weren't dramatic overhauls. They were quiet adjustments. But they mattered. They showed that the lesson had been learned, even if it had come at a significant cost. The cost of losing Morgan Freeman's trust. The cost of that very public moment. The cost of knowing that millions of people had watched them fail at something fundamental. Michael Strahan's journey after that morning was more complicated. His apology had been sincere, by all accounts. He genuinely seemed to understand that he had made a serious mistake. But understanding and recovering are two different things. The incident followed him. It came up in interviews. It was referenced in articles about him. It became part of his public narrative in a way that was uncomfortable and unavoidable. Some viewers forgave him. Some didn't. Some stopped watching the show because of it. Others stayed but remained critical. But the person at the center of it all, the person who had walked off that set with his head held high, seemed to move on with ease. Morgan Freeman continued making movies, continued doing interviews, continued living his life with the same grace and dignity he had always shown. When people asked him about that morning, he answered briefly and moved on. He didn't dwell. He didn't seek revenge or try to prolong the controversy. He had made his point. He had stood up for himself, and that was enough. That's perhaps the most powerful part of the whole story. Not the confrontation itself, but what it revealed about character, about knowing your worth, about refusing to accept less than you deserve, even when cameras are rolling and millions are watching. Morgan Freeman had spent decades earning respect in his industry, and when someone tried to take that away, tried to diminish it for entertainment value, he simply said no. He drew his line. He walked away. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching that dignity isn't negotiable. That respect isn't something you have to beg for or justify. It's something you can demand, something you can insist upon, something worth walking away for. The 38 seconds that changed everything weren't really about Morgan Freeman and Michael Strahan. Not in the end. They were about something bigger, about how we treat each other, about what we're willing to tolerate and what we're not, about the difference between entertainment and exploitation, about remembering that the person across from you, no matter how famous or how successful, is still a person deserving of basic human decency. That was the real lesson, and it took one of Hollywood's most respected voices walking off a set to teach it.